Hello and welcome to Crutchfield Live. I'm your host, JR. I'm the training manager here at Crutchfield. As you can see, we've got a whole new video set up for Crutchfield Live. We are super excited to use it today with our special guest. Our special guest, if you know anything about speakers, home speakers, and the people that design them, then you know this guy. His name is Andrew Jones, and he's right here on the big screen in what looks like my living room. Welcome, Andrew Jones, to the show. How are you?
I'm good. It's good to be here. I'm sort of in my living room. I've got my new listening room that just looks like I'm at home. I've got a library in the back, and I've got the system in the front, paintings and everything. Looks really cool.
It looks quite personalized in there. I see your initials and carved in wood behind you there.
I got those as my Easter egg in the back.
Nice,
a nice with me today. So
a nice collection of CDs and some vinyl over there.
Yeah, and all my physics books from university that are over 40 years old.
Nice. So is this your home or is this a workplace that you've made?
This is the workplace. We set this up to be a really good sounding listening room, but not to look like the typical listening room of bare walls and a few absorber panels stuck like warts on the wall. It's all decorated to make you feel as though you could be at home.
Yeah.
And that was the whole point about it.
So what we haven't mentioned here in the live yet is that, for those that may or may not know, you've recently made a move, right? The last I know that I spoke with you, you worked at a different company. You're now with MoFi Electronics.
I've been with MoFi 2 years this coming January.
2 years, and for a long time, nobody knew where you were or what you were doing. It was a huge mystery.
Lots of interesting speculation. All these people saying where they thought I might be moving to, and I'm looking at it going, nope, you're not going to guess this one.
And then you announced it, I believe, at Expona in Chicago. Is that right?
That's right. Yes.
And we didn't
want to announce too early because until I knew what kind of products I wanted to do, then I got not much to say, and. Even for announcing the product, we didn't announce the product at Expona because so many times it's very easy to get caught up in being excited about developing something and announcing it early, and people going, "So where is it?"
Yeah,
not ready yet. So we wanted to make sure we knew we had the date set for the manufacturing before we announced what the product was.
So we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about the product itself, but I'm going to go ahead and just for the viewers at home to let them know a couple things. One, if you have questions for me or for Andrew Jones while we're here live, please go ahead and submit them in the chat on the YouTube video. But primarily, we are here to talk to Andrew about the MoFi's new speakers, the SourcePoint 10s, which are currently available for back order, pre-order, whatever it is, on Crutchfield.com. We will be dropping a link into the meeting chat so that you can see those on our website right now. You can read all about them. We've got a ton of detail about them. I have personally yet to see them or touch them or hear them in person. Otherwise, I would have them right here in the room with me. So if you want to see them, you will have to click the link that will be coming into the meeting chat soon. Can I just double check? Oh, look, there's a question coming in here. I don't know what it says yet. You want to see what happens if we just read a question? And
why not?
Let's do it.
Live dangerously.
I love exactly. Living dangerously is the way to go here. This is from a viewer named Ramsey Edward. Is there a difference between audio wire and electrical wire? Can we use electrical wire to connect amplifier to subwoofer? This person may or may not be asking about home speakers, but that question is the age-old question. Can I use zip cord, electrical copper wire, to conductor to connect a speaker to an amplifier? I think I know what your answer is going to be, but feel free to let us know your thoughts.
Well, if you're talking just simply electrically, then pretty much any piece of wire will get signal through from the amplifier to the speaker. On a simple level, it has to be rated for the power levels you're using. It has to be low enough resistance that it doesn't mess up the interface between the speaker and the amplifier. Beyond that, there's a whole host of arguments we could have about the audibility and the necessity of how much you spend on speaker cables. So that's not for this discussion.
It might not be. I did have on my list of questions that I might or might not get to, and since this person raised it, I'm curious if you'd have thoughts on, and I'm not looking for brands or anything like that, but just in general, the idea of bi-amping or bi-wiring speakers. Do you believe in it? Makes a difference? Do you like it? Do you advocate for it? Do you care? What's your thoughts on bi-amping and bi-wiring?
So for this model, I deliberately avoided by capability.
I noticed that there's one set of positives and negatives on the back of the SourcePoint 10. So
yes, yeah. If we're talking, there's all manner of how you talk about what do you mean by bi-amping. There's passive bi-amping and active bi-amping. So when we talk about passive bi-amping, all we mean is putting one amplifier to drive per speaker, maybe the tweeter into a two-way system, and one amplifier to drive the bass section. But the crossover that was designed in the speaker remains. You're simply removing the links on the dual set of binding posts. It adds very little capability in terms of output because you're still driving the same signal voltages, full range from each amplifier. So the amplifier will pretty much clip at exactly the same point. The only reason why it might not is since the for the bass driver, if it's being asked to provide a lot of current, it would drag the voltage down because of limits in the power supply, and so it would prematurely clip. Whereas the tweeter amplifier isn't subject to the vagaries of what the bass amplifier is trying to do. But that depends on the regulation of the power supply. Most switching amps, for example, have switching power supplies which are fully regulated, so there'd be absolutely no benefit there. Active bi-amping means removing the passive crossovers. You certainly wouldn't put extra crossovers in the amplifiers in a bi-amp system if you're still using the passive crossovers. That would totally mess up how the bass driver is integrated with the main amplifier or with the tweeter. So, passive bi-amping is the only approach, and it's very, very limited advantages. Completely different when we're talking about a fully active system. Then there's huge advantages of having all the multiple amplifiers dedicated to the frequency range, but not so much in passive.
And I think most of our viewers probably don't live in a world or their world where everything it would take to actively bi-amplify these speakers is probably not happening. No. Good. What about bi-wiring? Just real quick on that one, then we'll get out of that. This is not the fun part of the discussion.
Well, I could make out a technical argument where you might be able to measure some difference to bi-wiring from a technical point of view. Now, if you're all about technical stuff and measurements are the only thing that tell you what's going on, then you'd mostly poo-poo bi-wiring. If you're into following that cables make a difference in sound, then you've given yourself an extra degree of freedom to pick and choose which cable you use for the woofer and the tweeter.
Yeah.
So in that sense, you'd say, oh, well, bi-wiring gives me an extra bit of choice. But I'm not going to argue which cables or what the sound of cables are or whether it's worth doing that. Just if you already believe in cables, it gives you an extra degree of freedom.
Excellent. At the bare minimum, use speaker wires that were designed to send music from an amplifier to a speaker, and use some good ones.
Yeah, use ones rated. And for me, one of the most important things is, are they flexible enough to make it easy to connect? I mean, like with power cords. So many power cords are so stiff.
Yeah.
You move something and it pulls the plug out of the socket and you lose all power. Speaker cables, especially spade type connectors, you're going to be connecting them up and then you're going to be moving the speakers around to find the right location in the room. Every time you twist and move the speaker, you can loosen up those spade connectors because the cable stiffness is fighting.
Mm-hmm.
And you're always trying to twist them to get the right orientation to get the spades into the bananas, and you could end up shorting them across, or they fall off and short themselves. So my main interest in cables is nice flexible cables of good enough gauge and good connectors, and I always prefer tight fitting sprung loaded banana plugs. My favorite way of connecting things,
and by far and away the easiest, for sure. So for those watching at home that are joining us, if you don't know who we've got on TV here, this is Andrew Jones, working as a speaker designer at MoFi Electronics. He's kind of world famous, if you're not already familiar, for designing some pretty incredible speakers, including the reference speakers from Technical Audio Dynamics. Do I have that right? Devices, Pioneer, Infinity, KEF, ELAC. In fact, when you were with ELAC, I did get to, I don't know if you can see this from there. I'm showing the webcam. This is me on the cover of Crutchfield.com.
That was you who did this.
Yeah, that was me that cut your ELAC speaker in half. I'm looking forward to cutting to one of your SourcePoint 10s in half. I don't know if you're going to send us one of those, but let's talk about those, because I think that's the main reason we're here, is to find out what should we be excited about with these new speakers that I'm looking forward to hearing for the first time.
Well, it was an interesting project. Joining MoFi, it gave me a chance to spend quite an appreciable time to decide what I wanted to do. There were very limited briefs of what MoFi wanted, other than to let me create something. And one of those was to have good, impactful bass. The other was this idea currently of having big speaker boxes, not narrower and narrower speaker cabinets, because there's a limit to how much driver you can put on the front of one of those cabinets. So you end up putting them on the side and whatever. But it intrigued me, the concept, we could go back to big boxes and big woofers. That's something that I haven't really done, other than in the TAD speakers, which were huge speakers, but they're high-end. All high-end speakers use big woofers. But most affordable speakers don't, until recently. There are exceptions, like Zoo Audio, as one example. But typically, woofers rarely get bigger than 8-inch. And so the idea of working with a 10-inch intrigued me. The other aspect I always do is concentric drivers. So would I be combining doing a three-way in the concentric driver with a big woofer? And as I got thinking more about it, having the time to think through possibilities, I thought, well, it'd be rather cool to do something I've never done before, and almost something it's not I've never done a two-way concentric. There were a couple KEF models I did back in the day, 40 years ago maybe now. But I haven't recently, and I'd always around the tweeter. But
let me stop you right there. You froze up for a minute. It looks like you're back now, and you were talking about, I think the last thing I heard was 40 years ago at KEF, but you're now looking to do something a little new and different with concentric drivers.
Yes, and do it as a two-way, something that I'd always said it has to be three-way in order to minimize cone movement. But the other way to minimize cone movement, if the driver is big enough, then the cone movement is less for a given amount of bass. And so that's the other way to do it. So if the brief is to have a big bass driver, then that's the perfect time to experiment with a two-way concentric. So that was the development I planned to do. And it looks as though, that must be much simpler to develop. It's just a two-way. But that one decision leads to all sorts of things I have to take care of in the development process. And that took time and took finding.
Freezing up again on us there. Oop, there he's coming back.
Oh, I'm back.
You're back now for us too. So let me clarify something you just said there. With the 10-inch driver being wider, more surface area, larger diameter than many of the slender speakers with the smaller 6.5, 8-inch, because they're wider with more surface area, they don't have to move as far in and out to create the same amount of bass.
Correct.
Which will allow them to also then be an effective mid-range speaker. Is that the idea?
Well, that's the difficulty. How it's not easy to make a 10-inch be an effective mid-range driver. It's common in pro audio, but the requirements in pro audio are not, for live sound, are not quite the same as what we want for home audio. And I'd never developed a 10-inch bass mid-range driver, and I'd never developed, obviously, a 10-inch Concentric. So that took a lot of development work to get to the point I am now. But MoFi was willing to give me the time and allow the investment, because all the parts, the cone, the surround, the tweeter, the magnet parts, hole forgings, everything had to be custom designed and custom tooled. And you can't test the concept until you spent all that money to tool up for all the special parts. So when the first driver got built up, I'm just keeping my fingers crossed. I started measuring it and going, ooh, this might actually work. And then I developed a first cut at the crossover and put it all together and started listening and thinking, yeah, this has got something about it. This is interesting. So I was fortunately happy and relieved that it had worked out.
I've seen in other interviews where you said that was that first listen, that first actual speaker to listen to with this design. You haven't changed much from there. Small tweaks and stuff. What kind of small tweaks? Can you be any more specific on like what type of things you went and said, let's fix this, let's fix that?
Well, fortunately, the cone worked very nicely, very nice and smooth. The match to the surround, we've got that corrugated surround on it, concertina surround, whichever word you want to use to describe it. And that took a bit of more development because there were some issues of matching that to the cone and getting the right acoustic properties. So I played around with that a bit and played around with the magnet system to improve it and fine tune it. But these days with modeling techniques, you can get a lot of the way there. The one thing we're a bit far off still is perfecting, just drilling up a cone and the material in the modeling and then building it and going, oh yeah, it matches perfectly. Modeling of those kind of things is good for incremental changes. They predict a change accurately. But if you're coming from nothing to something, then it's still not necessarily that good. And paper with its variabilities of knowing what its properties are is a bit more uncertain than maybe something like an aluminum cone.
So in a concentric driver design, the woofer itself is acting as a natural waveguide for the high frequencies coming out of the tweeter.
Yes.
I'm trying to wrap my mind around that as a concept, right? When I think of a waveguide, I think of a rigid piece of plastic aiming those high frequencies in a particular direction. But this waveguide is a moving diaphragm, and is that a challenge, or is that the benefit of that? Is that the waveguide is moving with the tweeter? What's going on there?
So you got a challenge in what is the shape of that waveguide? Because potentially the shape that you need as a waveguide for the tweeter is not the same shape as you need to act as a good mid-range cone. If it's a bass cone, you don't really care much. But if it's a bass mid-range cone, you really do care. So you got that battle to fight during the development. And we've already discussed the battle of you don't want it moving very far because it's not Doppler distortion. There's this belief that the cone moving around the tweeter creates Doppler distortion. We don't hear that Doppler distortion. Anyone who says, oh, by reducing motion, we reduce the distortion. Yes, you do, but it's not Doppler. it's mostly the regular intermodulation distortions that happen in a two-way system, which are pretty much eliminated in a three-way system. And secondly, it's just the fact that as the cone alters its position relative to where the dome is, you get a small change in the frequency response of the tweeter. And that's amplitude modulation distortion, which is, again, a different thing. Something you want to minimize, but it's not Doppler distortion. If Doppler distortion were audible, we would never bear listening to full range electrostatic speakers, because that's exactly what would be happening in a full range electrostatic. All the signal is carried on one diaphragm that is moving back and forth quite a long way to the base. So there you go. But one of the things to understand about waveguides is there's a belief it restricts the dispersion at the top end. It doesn't if it's correctly designed. What it's doing is restricting the dispersion at the bottom end, where it's too wide when it crosses over to the woofer. You know, typical woofer gets more and more directional as you go up in frequency. And what you hope for is you can cross over low enough such that it's not too narrow by the time you cross over to the much wider directed tweeter. That's where you get this mismatch off axis, where you get a hole in the mid-range because the woofers become directional, the tweeter isn't. What a waveguide does is help restrict the bottom end of the tweeter and match it exactly to the woofer. So if you were to go off axis, you'll see very little difference off axis other than a gentle downward tilt in overall response. And big woof waveguides are very good in that respect and also allow you to cross over lower. So that was particularly important when I'm talking about a two-way with a 10-inch woofer. I can't cross over at 3K. I needed to cross over about 1.5K. So that was part of the development of the tweeter. Has it got low enough resonant frequency? Has it got enough power handling? Has it got enough movement capability to cross it over nearly an octave lower than typically you cross over a 5 or 6 inch woofer to a 1-inch tweeter? So the tweeter is a larger diameter voice coil, large roll surround, lower resonant frequency, and also by putting it in that waveguide, it picks up a tremendous amount of efficiency increase at the bottom end of its working range. And so once again, that helps minimize the amount of power we put into the tweeter. And at the same time, the magnet assembly allows me to get a very high flux density in the tweeter. So the tweeter itself is 95 dB efficiency at the top end and 100 dB at the bottom end. So it doesn't need much power to produce very high sound levels.
Yeah,
that's padded down, obviously, through the crossover.
Those are big numbers for tweeter efficiency. So that's, yeah. And to cross them over that low, it makes a lot more sense now why this works. I'm really looking forward to hearing them. I want to ask you something a little less technical now. You know, a big part of the process in developing speakers, as you've described, as you've told us about the room you're in, is sitting there listening to speakers. Is that as tedious as it might sound? Is it awesome? Do you enjoy it, or do you get sick of it? Talk to us about that as a process and the many hours it takes. Like, how do you keep from going crazy listening? What I presume you're listening to the same song or songs over and over again. Tell me more about how that works for you.
Well, so it's very enjoyable. And like, the frustration is knowing when you've got it just right. You know, it's like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. This bed is too hard, this bed is too soft, this bed is just right. When is that bed just right? But it's still ultimately an enjoyable experience because you've created something, you're trying to make it the best that you can. And the music that I use, I've always chosen music for demos that, yes, it's good demo material, particularly if I'm trying to show particular features, you know, how good it is for male vocal or female vocal or more complex music. But every piece I select musically, at least for me, and hopefully for enough of the audience, I don't send people screaming out the room. It's musically enjoyable. It's not just, we like to denigrate audiophile music as being really well recorded, but boring as heck to listen to. There's lots of audiophile music, if we define that as being very well recorded. There's lots of that is musically very involving, and lots of more popular recordings that are well recorded. So every piece I play, I can stand listening to it over and over and over at a show or when I'm in the listening room. And it's absolutely the case that once I finished the listening evaluation part, I could still go back and go, okay, so now I can just.
Now he can just what? I'm on the edge of my. I lost you. I think you're back now. I lost you right as you said, now I can just, and then we were all waiting with bated breath for what came next.
Now I can just just enjoy listening to that piece of music as a piece of music. It doesn't preclude its use. I've immediately finished using it to develop with. I've made my decisions. Now I can just easily go back and just, okay, now I don't have to think, I can just enjoy that piece of music. So I enjoy that process. And I'm always anxious that all the initial development is done through measurement, but the final development is always done through listening. And that kind of sounds, well, how can that be? How can it be all designed by measuring, but finished by listening? It's because everything I hear, I will try and relate back to something in the measurement. But always, we're designing imperfect products. There's no perfect speaker. If we set a goal of what a perfect measurement for a speaker would be, we're way off of that. And so I'm dealing in imperfections. I'm dealing in how far I'm away from that perfect measured performance. And when I see those imperfections in those measurements, I want to relate that to what the audibility of that is. Because not everything we measure in a curve is immediately audible, and vice versa. And so that's the fun part, trying to relate one to the other. But ultimately, we can say that there's an ideal goal for the measurement of a speaker. The trouble is, which measurement is it? Because there isn't a single parameter of frequency response even that is the goal, because every speaker type has different directivity characteristics and different interactions with the room. And so there isn't one on-axis curve that defines what the sum total of that speaker's technical capability is or audible capability. And so if we're dealing with those imperfections, basically it's me deciding which ones I can live with and which ones I can't. If I hear something that I don't like and I can see it in the measurement and I go back and adjust till it's gone, then that's a win. For someone else, I might have ignored something that's important to them. But I can't, in my mind as I'm developing, try and second guess what everybody might think.
Yeah.
I just have to do what I do, trust that, well, I've managed to do okay so far. So, hopefully, once again, I can do something that people like, as long as I also like it.
Hearing you speak about designing speakers over the years, the different companies you've worked for, what you're doing now, it reminds me so much of like a rock and roller, a songwriter, somebody who's creating their next song. They wake up in the middle of the night and they write down an idea on a piece of paper that they had because they don't want to lose it. Is that how it works for you? Do you kind of see yourself that way as a little bit of an artist. Obviously, there's a lot of science and math behind it too, but it seems like there's a lot of artistry in what you do.
Well, I think I'd use the word imagination, because coming up with ideas, they come from your imagination. They come from your subconscious often. And for me, when you have suddenly a creative thought, it's not come out of nothing. It's come out of the sum total of what you've been thinking about recently, everything you've done before that's just gone into your brain, it's in there somewhere. And you might not immediately recall these ideas, but it's in there, and it's you keep giving new input and you subconsciously processing. And at some point it'll pop out and you go, ah. And I had one of those moments just the other day, and I had to call my brother. Hey, I just had this idea. Because my brother's also works in the audio field, and so it's always good to go back and forth with him on concepts and try and show I've thought of something that he hasn't.
Nice. A little one-upsmanship.
Exactly. And
a little bit of a little bit of keeping up with the Joneses. I'm sorry, I can't believe I didn't catch that the first time.
It's bad enough everybody else has to do it, but we have to do it with each other. We've got nowhere else to go.
Yeah.
So you have this brilliant idea, and then you go, so will it work?
We've frozen just ever so briefly again. You said, will it work was the last thing we heard.
Will it work? So now you have to go and do the real work of testing that concept and see how practical it is and can it be made to work. I mean, one day I had this old dog. She'd gone through all these operations. We'd had to remove half her jaw, well, not me, from cancer. And so when she eats, it's like half an hour. So I'm watching over her all the time in the kitchen, just kind of, and I once had this idea of how to improve measurement techniques. Like, I could do that. And so I then next day went off and started thinking about that, and even had some MSc student at the University of England working on the practicality bit. So these thoughts just pop up at any moment. But the key is, will they work? And even if they will, can you practically do it?
And it's smart of you to capture those when it happens, to call your brother, to write it down, to not lose it. I think, I do a little bit of stand-up comedy, and I see things all the time that make me laugh. And then the ones I write down might actually turn into something, and the ones I don't are gone forever, and I'm never going to get that joke back. And so that's it's a mark of intelligence to capture that stuff and to record it so you don't lose it. So with these SourcePoint 10s, these are the only speakers available yet for now from MoFi. Do you see them as 2-channel speakers or as part of a home theater system? Are there the rest of the home theater speakers? Is that something we might have to look forward to, or can you comment on that?
Well, our initial brief was to be concentrating on 2-channel. And, for me, I'm mainly listening to 2-channel anyway. So that was my goal, develop a great 2-channel speaker. But by 2-channel, we mean, well, it could also go in studios if it's a 2-way concentric, perfect for putting on a desktop, and or a bit big. But it being a 2-way concentric, it's completely consistent directionality in all directions around, consistent performance in all directions, which means you can lay it on its side. So, in my mind, there's, that's perfect for studios because you can reduce the height so you can see over it easier to looking into recording space. But of course, that's also why we turn speakers on the side for home theatre, because we want to try and fit the center channel underneath the screen. And clearly one of the best ways to do a center channel is a concentric driver, because orientation doesn't matter. So you can just take that speaker, lay it on the side. And at the show, we had a lot of people going, oh, this would make an excellent home theatre system because it's efficient, good power handling, easy to drive, and you can just put it on your side and you've got the center channel. So you can get a really high performance home theatre system. So de facto, it becomes a home theatre.
So the answer is you're done. You've done it.
Yeah.
Home theater speakers
So
are ready to
we
go.
made a little wooden base that the speaker sits on, because it's not obvious until you look close, but the speaker goes straight back and then there's a 3-degree slope after a few inches towards the back panel. So when you sit on its side and you support it properly, it's just pointing up slightly by 3 degrees, which makes it great because center channels typically get sat lower, and so now the axis points up toward you.
So primarily designed with 2-channel in mind, and I'm thinking about MoFi and their love and interest and focus on the whole world of vinyl and turntables and all of that. And I know that when a song or an album is mixed and mastered, it's mastered differently depending on if it's going to be pressed into vinyl or made into a high-res digital file. They mix them differently for those different delivery methods. Does a speaker designer design speakers differently, thinking about how the music is going to be delivered to their speaker?
So I would say they're not necessarily mixed differently. They're certainly
mastered primarily, yes.
Right. And yeah, I talked to Rick Rubin about this once, because as I was touring the studio, I was asking him, what speakers do you use for all your mixing and mastering? And it was very interesting. He'd done an experiment where they brought in about 10 different potential speakers that they could use. And they put each of them into each of the different studios. This was a huge undertaking, but each into the different studios that he'd got at his setup.
At Shangri-La?
At Shangri-La.
Yeah.
Which thankfully is still standing.
I know, it dodged a fire bullet, that one. Whew.
Yeah. So the aim was not to listen to each speaker and see which sounded best, right, or closest to what they thought they were doing when they were mixing it. It was, we'll remaster for each of the different mediums that the speaker, that this recording might be listened on. You know, in the control room, in your home stereo setup, in the car, on the headphones, on your tablet or iPad.
Yeah.
All these different things. And we'll remix and remaster a number of different recordings on each of these speakers. And then we'll find out which speaker gave the best all-over result for each of the different mediums that we might be listening to that speaker over. So that you musically hear everything you need to hear as much as possible, regardless of which medium you're listening. I thought that was a fascinating concept. But when I'm listening, and in fact, when any of us are listening, other than perhaps a recording we made ourselves in a particular venue, we have no idea what it should be sounding like.
Right.
You just got to go into a recording studio and see all the tweaks that they do, both in EQ to separate things out in the mix, all the different devices they send it out through to add special effects, natural or artificial reverberation, which mics they choose, where they place them with respect to the instrument. There's so many things that it's an artistic endeavor to create something. And that something isn't necessarily the sound whatever it may be of that instrument just out in that recording studio as is, as if you walked into that recording space. That's so rare.
Yeah.
And even when we're capturing a live event in a hall, which microphones did we use? Did we use spaced pair? Did we use crossed cardioids? Did we use the Decker tree? All these different decisions, artistic decisions we made to capture that event. Did we use spotlights on the soloists? So I don't know any of that. Most of us don't. If we pick any particular recording, no idea what actually happened. But we listen to it and we've got an expectation of what we kind of want to hear. And we choose our systems either based on getting our favorite recordings to sound how we are wanting them to hear. It's no different really for me, whether it's vinyl or digital sources. I'll listen to a variety of them and I'll tweak until I'm happy.
Do you do something like maybe where you play the same song on vinyl and then play it on like a high res file or something to hear the differences? Do you not bother with that?
I don't, not particularly, no. It's just some of my favorite recordings I've got on vinyl. I mean, mostly these days it's been digital sources, just optimizing those.
Yeah.
But it's still just take whatever recordings are my favorite through the years and see if they sound good on these new speakers.
Let's talk.
Going back, you mentioned something about all the different companies. I've been doing this for 50 years.
Yeah.
So it's not that many in all those years. But is my sound exactly the same now as it used to be, even though it's me saying I designed for what I like? I would say not necessarily fully, or else I've learned nothing in 50 years. Everyone's tastes change on what they believe is correct or not. And so my designs have followed broadly my philosophy. There's some things that haven't changed, but some things have through experience, and will continue to do so.
Let's talk about power for a second. These speakers, the SourcePoint 10s, they're 8 ohm, 91 dB efficient. That might tell somebody looking at those numbers, I don't need a crap ton of power to make these things sound good. And in fact, the RMS power ranges from 30 to 100 RMS watts of power. So they don't seem like they're super power hungry. So inevitably, there's going to be people out there that will power these beautiful speakers with, you know, a fairly inexpensive entry-level stereo receiver. And then there's going to be others that will absolutely power them with some real legitimate high current power. What's your thoughts on the spectrum of power and what does it take to make these speakers sound the way they're supposed to sound?
I've always thought people get too hung up on power. If we're just talking about power to get sound levels, the number of times we're running any amplifier way into clipping and blasting our ears out, that's relatively low. But you know, at the show and here in the lab, I typically run a 200 something watts into 8 ohm amplifier, and I can go very loud. I think I clipped it once, but that is extraordinarily loud because the speaker's efficient, 91 dB. And I made it 8 ohms because I wanted it to be easy to drive. And if we're thinking back to the old days of big speakers, the reason speakers are not efficient these days is we've wanted smaller and smaller speakers. And when I was designing all the ELAC speakers, they're all small boxes. The physics show that if you want a certain bass performance and a certain impedance level, you can only get 84, 85 dB out of a 5-inch small box speaker. But this is a big box, so I don't have those restrictions. So 91 dB and 8 ohm, and a real 8 ohms, 6.4 minimum. So you then get the question of, well, you don't have to have that many watts. On the last day of the show, on the Sunday morning, I walked in and the guys had set up one of the BH.
Oh, we lost him one more time. He'll be back. There you go. You said the guys had set up, and then we lost you for a few seconds.
Set up a BAT integrated tube amplifier, and that's 45 watts per channel. So first thing I did was get out my SIA track from deadmau5.
Okay.
And I thought this will show whether it can do it. And surprisingly, it could. So I had no qualms about using a 45 watt tube amplifier. And if you're not really going loud, a 30 watt tube amplifier is going to work great because it's such an easy load. And the only thing about receivers, the lower power receivers tend to be cheap, low cost.
Sure.
So there's a difference between talking about low power amplification and low cost, low sound quality amplification. So that's the only thing I'd be aware of. If you're going to go to too low of a cost of amplifier, its sound quality might not be up to the job as a good match for what these speakers are capable of.
Perfect. That's kind of what I thought. And yeah, I recognize that low power and cheap is not the same thing at all. Not at all. We're going to repurpose this also for Crutchfield, the podcast, right? We're going to take the audio from this and we're going to make it into an episode of our podcast. And on the podcast, part of the point of Crutchfield, the podcast is where we ask our employees mostly and our special guests questions like, you have access to some of the best audio gear and consumer electronics products in the world. We've got a wonderful employee discount. We all take full advantage of it. What got your attention? What made you so excited you went ahead and spent your hard-earned money on it, right? You could choose anything you want. What did you choose? And I'm assuming you have Andrew Jones speakers all over the house, right? But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you have somebody else's speakers around. But what about the other electronics? What about the TV that you have? Do you have a home theater system? And so it's the sky's the limit, wide open. Tell us about something that you have access to because you're Andrew Jones that you're excited about and would love to tell us about.
It goes two ways. I have TAD speakers at home, the big original model ones. But they're kind of lost in my home because I live in a condo and I can't really play that loud. Which is why I love this facility that I'm in now, because it's close to home and it's set up like a listening room. So if I really want to relax and do the fun part of having this job, which is having a great setup, I can do it here. So those TADs are going to come here. I've already got a pair in the back of the room. I've got my TAD compact monitor speakers. I've got a VHL ST200 two-channel tube power amplifier. I've got some of Peter Madnick designed DACs and power amps. I've got that old Pioneer amplifier that was built looking like a tube amplifier with everything built on top of the chassis.
Yeah.
I've got a lot of vintage gear that I enjoy. I've got Acostat 1+1 speakers there in the cupboard in the corner. Actually, they're in the bathroom. The bathroom was the only room tall enough to store them in. I got quad BSL 57s. I love playing with lots of different things. It's not just being locked into one system. It's being able to play around with lots of different things and understand the different kinds of sounds that you can have.
Mm-hmm. What about your car? Do you just have the factory stereo in your car, or have you replaced that with some amazing sounding car stereo? We do a little bit of car stereo around here, so I figured I'd ask.
No, it's interesting. I have actually been involved with helping develop car stereo sound systems. And that was a very interesting experience for me. Luckily, I wasn't the one doing the work of fitting them.
Right.
Way too old for doing that. So it was interesting to understand, well, what is the difference when you're measuring a system in a car as opposed to when you're measuring them at home? How should it sound? And I had great fun and developed some really good sounding cars for 3 different projects. And what was interesting about that was that people say, well, isn't it difficult developing for the environment of a car? Well, the good thing is, once you've done it, you know that every single person who listens to that system will hear the same thing. With my speakers, there's no way I can guarantee that. Right?
We deal with that on a daily basis, right? We have a vehicle fit database, so we can tell you exactly what speakers will work in your car, basically how they'll perform, and we can make a really good recommendation based on some factors that we already know. All we got to know is what car you have. And boy, the wide open spaciousness of home audio and all of the different rooms, every single room is different. It allows for creativity and problem solving, but what it does is if you need the comfort zone of knowing exactly what's going to fit and how it's going to sound, you don't get that luxury in home at all.
Well, that's why I enjoy doing all the shows. Partly because I'm showing off.
Yes.
Showing off my babies. I'm meeting everybody. I like doing it. But it also means I do the setup. Any show that I'm going to be running, I want to be there doing the setup and understanding what it takes to get the speakers sounding at least halfway good, hopefully a lot better than that, in every single room I ever go into. And so that gives you a lot of experience understanding the interaction between the speaker and the room.
Yeah.
But with my car, these days I lease cars.
Yeah.
Way past buying them. So it's whatever it comes with. And my current car is a high-end Volvo. So it comes with the BMW sound system. And in one way, I'm going, you mean I have to spend money on a competitor's hi-fi system? But I have no choice. It comes with it if I want that spec level of the car. But it's actually quite fun. And it was very funny when I first bought that car because it turns out that the finance manager that I had to go in and sign, I'm busy signing the forms. It says, I need your name, address, company you work for. And I go, Andrew Jones. I go, at the time, ELAC. ELAC? You're Andrew Jones from ELAC? He'd been an audio enthusiast for his life, most of his life, and his father was before him. And he said, I've been following what you've been doing. So he's telling me about the sound system in there and how to plug in your hard drive and what kind of files you can use because it doesn't handle all the files. And we were having a long conversation about this. And the next day when I came to pick up the car, because the check had to clear, let's put it that way. Came back the next day to pick it up, and I'm with my wife, and the salesman's showing us everything. And the guy walks up, he said, Andrew, can I have a word with you in my office? Maybe I'm not getting this car after all. So I walk in, he says, do you know about the AudioQuest jitterbug? And I go, yes. He says, well, if you plug that into the USB port in the car before you plug in the hard drive, it'll make the sound system so much better. So I go back out, and my wife's going, what did he want? Oh, to talk about a hi-fi. He goes, you boys and your hi-fi, she goes. And the sales guy, I know since you left yesterday, he's been non-stop showing us all these videos on his computer, video interviews of you. So
that's great.
That was fun.
I can see it now. The headline from this Crutchfield Live is that Andrew Jones has a B&W system in his Volvo. I think I've got one last question for you. I don't see any more coming in from the people that are watching live. And we didn't have a ton watching live, but I have a feeling this one, we're going to get a lot more views on this one after the live is posted up on YouTube and people can watch it whenever they want. So, but my last question for you is, I think a little birdie told me that some point in 2023, we might actually have in-person vendor trainings happening again here at Crutchfield. Ever since COVID, we have not done that, right? We've kept it safe and kept everybody at home that we could, but it's looking like we might be able to get more people back into the office. We'll get to see all of our coworkers we haven't seen in years, and we'll get those people that we've hired in these last few years who have had zero in-person vendor trainings, zero opportunity to really listen to a bunch of home speakers or car speakers or anything. I'm really looking forward to that resuming in 2023. And your trainings with your past trainings have always been memorable and a highlight, and we talk about them with our new employees. So I hope to God you are planning to come here and show off your SourcePoint 10s and whatever else you're working on.
Sign me up. I love doing those trainings. So yeah, as soon as you can get me out there, I'm all for it. I'd love to.
We have
in fact, leaving ELAC, I'm thinking, I'm not going to be able to do Crutchfield trainings any longer. Then I find the MoFi do sell for you. So I'm thinking, great. But then, of course, it's COVID and you're not doing any in-person anyway. And I was thinking, why not money? You've got to start doing this. So that's fantastic news.
We have a beautiful new call center here in Charlottesville with a beautiful brand new vendor training room that is huge and beautiful and sound treated and everything. And it's gotten almost no use. We have meetings in there, but it's very few vendor trainings have ever happened in there. So I really look forward to those coming back. It'll help our advisors, help our customers even better because they will get to meet people like you, hear your speakers, and actually use that when talking with customers. So yeah, I can't wait for that to happen again. I'm looking forward to seeing you again in person.
And me too.
Andrew, is there anything I have lacked, I've forgotten to ask you that I really should have, that you need to tell our viewers at home?
I'm sure everyone, when we finish, will tell me, why didn't you talk about such and such? But at the moment, no, I think we've covered a lot of it.
Excellent. It's been fun for me, Andrew. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Thank you for the one question that we got from YouTube. And if you have questions and you're watching this when it's no longer live, go ahead and post your questions in the comments on this YouTube video. We will be watching those. We have people that do answer those questions even post live. So don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any questions about the new MoFi Electronics SourcePoint 10s designed by our special guest today, Andrew Jones. Andrew, once again, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Have a wonderful one. We'll see you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for watching. Are we still live?